Good afternoon, welcome. Thanks for joining me here to chat about maturation. So it's going to be slightly different because we've got Scotch whisky and Irish whisky represented at this discussion, so we can talk about both. But let's start with Scotch. So Gordon, we use oak, obviously. Is there a reason? Is there a reason for that?
There's a number of reasons why we use oak and only oak. First, it's widely available. Oak forests are sustainable. They stretch all the way from Europe all the way around into America, a temperate band of oak trees. There's a number of species within that, and we can select different species. It's very good for making non-leaking barrels out of, non-leaking casks out of it. Just the way it closes off its xylem and phloem, the vessels that take liquid through it. It's pretty impermeable as well, so, and it lasts a long time. And it also gives the flavour profile. Most importantly, it gives the flavour profile that we require. So all these different reasons come together that oak is what we've decided on. I know in the past we've tried different woods, and it's a good idea to experiment with them. But given the volume of casks that we require in the Scotch whisky industry, there's something in the region of 25 million casks in Scotland at the moment. It'd be very difficult to have use another species of tree that isn't oak, given the wide availability of oak.
Yeah, and it's a legal requirement, isn't it?
And it's a legal requirement which kind of ridden on the back of that. And legal requirements not only just made with oak, but also the way the oak has been pre-treated, if you like. Most people think you can, for instance, the requirement requires that Scotch taste and be coloured by the ingredients that it's made from, which is oak. So we can't. Pre-use of oak casks can't be used to flavour whisky with. A ridiculous example would be we can't store chilies, say for instance, in an oak cask and then use that to mature Scotch and make a chilled Scotch. That would be legal. It's got to be the flavour of the natural oak that comes through, albeit it's been tempered and changed slightly by the first use, whether that's wine, whether that's bourbon.
Yeah, so we can use casks, Scott. We can use casks that have had other liquids in them.
Yes, and that's where you get a lot of the variation at the moment, either being after bourbon, either first or second, and then you've got various wines, or you've got then sherries and ports, and the new introduction of the Calvados as well. So that even just sticking to oak, there's a lot of variety out there, and not just it being, you can have American oak, you can have European oak, and European oak can be French oak or Hungarian oak, and each of these will bring a different flavour profile to the liquid as well.
And is that because of the composition of the oak? Or
yeah, it's the variety of the tree. I mean, the American one tends to be more of the vanilla that people think of that comes through there in the caramel, whereas as you come into the European oak, there's more a bit of cloves and a bit of spiciness coming through. And I think if you age it longer in a European oak, you probably can age it for a little bit longer because it's not got extracted. There's not as much vanilla notes coming through that gives you vanilla on the coconut. So for some people, they don't want that. So even remaining with oak, there's still a lot of variety and opportunity out there for different flavour profiles.
What I find quite interesting about if you look at the congeners that come from oak, irrespective of the oak species or how it's been pre-treated, either heat treated or pre-wines in there, it's exactly the same compounds that come out that give the flavour, but they're difference in ratios and differences in strength, and those differences in ratios and different strengths give the different flavours that we experience with the different oak, and you can play a lot of tunes with that, which is fascinating, I think.
Yes. Now, you could argue that you can play different tunes, maybe at an advantage to the Scotch whisky industry, in that you can use different types of wood. Is that correct?
Yeah, I suppose one of the glaring differences between the Irish technical file and the Scotch one around the regulations with making whisky is that where the Scotch whisky file would mention that it's oak specifically, Ireland, either by accident or by design, references wood. And that has been there for quite some time and probably hasn't been fully explored or begun to even be explored until relatively recently. Now, because you can use other wood types beyond oak doesn't mean that you should. And so we're, as an industry, many are now tiptoeing into using other wood types, but I suppose the reason that Scotland has decided to write in that it should only be oak is because there are a lot of attractive attributes to using oak. It's less porous than other wood types. So in Ireland we have explored, various distilleries have explored things like mulberry, acacia, chestnut, wild cherry, and the problems that you run into, or I suppose there's problems, benefits and issues that you will come from each wood type. One of the big ones is the level of losses that you can incur. Different woods react differently when liquid is added into it. There's also the fact that I suppose both whisky industries in Ireland and Scotland have become heavily reliant on casks that have been used once before, and there's reasons for that. Things like wild cherry, acacia, chestnut, mulberry don't tend to be used in other categories as much as well. So there are plenty of examples of even products on market at the moment that are finished in whiskies, but we're kind of at that stage where most of the maturation time has happened in first fill examples of these casks for short periods of time, and that will have an effect. But it's different to full maturations. It's different, again, just like virgin oak is very different to a bourbon cask or a sherry cask or whatever. That will most likely translate with the other cask types as well. So it's a very exciting time potentially and a category to be explored. But I suppose I don't think that oak will ever be I don't think ever be challenged as being the main wood type that will be used in Ireland. And part of that as well is even the challenges that those that have tried it already with finished whiskies and brought them to market is that it's interesting as a curiosity, but most people are quite perplexed by, well, hold on, what is this? So it's kind of the industry has grown to be reliant on a lot of bourbon cask and a lot of the flavours we have come to know Irish or indeed Scotch whisky are from bourbon matured or sherry matured whiskies or a combination or so then when you bring in something like mulberry that has quite like a sweet but like a zingy almost it was like the influences I've gotten so far are almost like a very sweet medicine you're given as a child, that type of a thing, and it's a peculiar flavour profile and maybe an alien one that you wouldn't have experienced elsewhere, and just to try and push beyond that curiosity level and that it is something different. So it's firmly in that category at the moment of something different, something unusual, but whether any of the wood types can work themselves into a mainstay will probably take a couple of generations to see what works and what doesn't quite work.
Are there any of the wood types that you've tried, or any of them really stand out as, oh my goodness, this really improves whiskey, or it's just different and interesting?
I suppose I find them like, and that's one of the things. Like as I suppose we're all in this, you're trying to create new and interesting flavors, and one man's perfect whiskey is very different to another. So as long as it can make a quality whiskey, as in and not taint it in any way, and there's no major taints, but it's largely probably to do with the first fill element to it, where it's just overpoweringly influential. But there's certainly the likes of the acacia and chestnut are bringing in spices, which is a big attribute of Irish pot still whiskey category, something that we want to amplify in our distillation or on our brewing methods. But then if you can add an extra layer on top with your cask type, that's something that I'm sure could be potentially useful there. And then wild cherry, it's unusual. Wild cherry and mulberry are more in the sweeter gingery kind of a flavour profile, but they are the few that I have worked with so far are you have to be very careful because they're over wooded, and it's a very heavy wood characteristic. And again, that's probably no fault of the cask. If we were to do the same with a virgin oak, there's a reason there's so little virgin oak used in Ireland and Scotland, even though you could use it. It's just that it becomes overwooded too quickly. So it's something that it'll be explored further, and I have a high degree of hope for it, but it remains to be seen where exactly it can be taken. And the more people, it's good to see the amount of experimentation that is happening there, because we're going down avenues because we think this is where it's going to deliver the best results. And the more people explore and the more ideas that come together and try it, the quicker we'll get to positive end results. And Middleton released a Method of Madness release there in Wild Cherry, and it's an incredible whiskey in its own right, to take a single grain and make it so interesting. So they're already proving that they can be good whiskies beyond just the point of curiosity. So it's kind of at the watch this space kind of phase at the moment, but there are positive signs.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably quite a lot of consumers that are not looking for new and interesting flavours. They say you know what you get from an ex-bourbon. Maybe that's what a lot of the consumers are wanting.
Well, I think now in this new age of I suppose forums like this, where people can become more educated, or the amount of information that's contained in your phone, in your pocket, and it's not just reading the back label and to try and understand it. You can get a full explanation of any product and what it is and what was the thought process. Now you'll get plenty lies as well, but that people, I think the new consumer, there's a lot more interest in experimentation, and also for distilleries that are trying new things, it's a lot easier to get that across to the customer. I think where previously people trusted things like Scotch single malt and regions, and it was very defined as like, oh, you can trust Islay, or you can trust Spacesides as being this category. There's now space for people to kind of push the boundaries beyond that, because you can get that narrative across beyond just the little square space on the back of your bottle.
Good point.
Always have to be careful that word interesting. That's a blender's term, means it's bloody horrible. That's interesting.
Gordon, Michael kind of touched on the word virgin a couple of times there, virgin oak. Can you maybe explain what that is and what you'd have to watch for if you're maturing in that type of cask?
Just about all our oak that we use in Scotch whisky has been used before. So it's been used particularly in the bourbon industry, or in the Spanish wine industry, sherry, or allied industries to that. Virgin oak, it's not been used before, so it's just as it's been come off the tree, it's been heat treated, fired, or toasted, depending on the recipe, and then we fill it with new mixed spirit. The problem is we've got unbalanced extractives now that normally the wine treatment or the bourbon treatment would have taken out, and that's technically sometimes called oak lactones come out. These are extractives. These are congeners that occur in Scotch, but we want to see lower levels because it would unbalance our spirits, where it adds to bourbon, say for instance, and so you get what bourbon are really looking for. They're looking for that really sweet vanilla flavour as much as they can get in there, with a little spice and wooded flavours underneath. We would find that too unbalanced. So we use virgin oak, we get a bitterness starts to come out, an oak lactone type flavour, which is almost nutty in some ways, almost coconutty in some ways, and we get an unbalanced flavour. Might be so pleasant for some people, but because we have long maturation times as well, that just exacerbates the problem. So if we do use virgin oak, we only mature for a short period of time, and then probably blend that away with some more mature whiskey to balance up the flavours. So it's really this balance and complexity. That's what Scotch whisky and Irish whisky is is typified by, is great complexity, rather than punching in the face, as it were, like bourbon does, with a great vanilla, ice creamy creamy types of flavour. We go for complexity and stretching the flavour out. So we don't want that unbalanced flavour.
Thank you. So this is a very general question, Scott. So what kind of casks do you use?
We actually use virgin oak casks.
I'd be interested to know
but we use that with the spirit we produce from rye, because the rye, the spiciness can cut through that, and the liquid we produce, and after maturing it does reach a great balance in a short period of time. So I agree with what you said about Scotch maybe needs that little bit longer. I mean, if you look at any cask, so you've got virgin oak cask, you've got after bourbon cask, you've got second after bourbon, general refills. Each of those will have a different influence and flavour, and then you can then go into the sherries, but not just sherry in general. You've got Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez, and each of the fortified wine that's been in the cask before. Depending how long it's been in the cask before, that will all have an interaction with the liquid, each again giving you a different flavour profile. And then you can just open up wine, then you can open up port. You know, the list is almost endless of all the different nuances you can get from different casks. And I think a lot of work's been done by a lot of the industry within the cask environment, but I still think there's a lot to be learned and the nuances still to be found within it.
I think it's absolutely essential. Just reiterate what you're saying there, agree with you, that it's essential for a distillery to have an oak policy, a wood policy.
Wood management policy, yeah.
I see too many distilleries and they have parcels of oak here, parcels of that. We'll try this, we'll try that. And they end up losing that distillery character because they have all these different types, and you could have a myriad of different types of oak, different species, different treatments beforehand, and it you add that all together when it comes to the blending process at the end, trying to put a product together, it kind of gets too many colours. It's a bit like adding too many colours, and it just goes brown, it just goes beige. You lose the freshness and you lose the individuality if you use too many different types of wood.
And I think sometimes within the industry we look to see what other people are using, and what cask may work for that spirit type won't necessarily work for that one. I mean, you hear a lot about sherry bombs. Well, I like the balance of you still can have the underlying spirit and a little bit of the flavour from the cask. It's trying to get that balance, but as we've said along, each consumer's got a different expectation. Some people want the overpowering sherry, others want to have the flavour behind it.
I did a blend for a company and put it to a flavour panel, and there was only a 3% difference in the sherry inclusion rate. And very definitely they preferred one, about 90% preferred one over the other, and that was only a 3% difference in the amount of sherry whiskies.
So quite an influence that
quite an influence. It's surprising what little differences can make. You can kill the flavour off by having too much within there. It's I find it really fascinating the way people can pick up on these flavours. They might not know what the flavours are. They might find that difficult to express, but that's definitely different from that, and it's very small differences.
Yeah, and it's quite unique to the individual as well, isn't it? Aroma percentage.
And so an individual distillery has to work their way through that, as it were, to find.
I think you're right. I think it's defining what your style is going to be, and sticking to it rather than trying to do what everybody else is doing. Is having a plan and sticking to the plan, but being able to adapt as the product matures, especially for us who's a new distillery. There's nothing been written about our liquid, so that our oldest liquid is only coming up in 8 years old. So it's still getting the flavours and still trying to find itself. So there's still a lot of work, certainly from our point of view, to get that right for us.
So one last quick point. We hear about the angel share. It's like you go to every visitor centre, you hear about that. So you've got the gaseous exchange. Is that really important in maturation?
Yes. If you take angel share and average, with one caveat, I'll put that in first. If you look at angel share, well, let's just say it's 2% per annum, which is sort of general rule of thumb. We did some work looking at that and found that if you looked at different parcels of the same whiskey, the angel share would vary in different warehouses. But there wasn't a difference in flavour. So what that meant was you could actually cut down on the angel share,
Okay.
but you couldn't get rid of it. The important point
Yeah.
was you couldn't get rid of it completely.
Yeah.
You still had to have a gaseous exchange going on for oxidative reactions to go on within the cask.
Yeah.
So that gives a challenge, actually. That means if you have a warehouse with many millions of casks within there, you could actually cut down on the angel share if you could manage the warehouse without changing flavour, but you can't cut it down completely.
You can't remove it
So
completely.
it's a challenge, and indeed some warehousemen do that way they manage the warehouse.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, chaps. That was a good discussion. Pleasure to have you with me. Thank you.
Thank you.